Another story walked into my nail shop today that made me stop for half a second before I even picked up the file. For privacy reasons, I'm changing the names. My client is Claire. Her husband is Derek. And the private investigator is Mr. Holloway. Claire looked polished in the way women do when they are trying very hard not to fall apart in public. Hair done, makeup done, clothes neat, voice controlled. But when I took her hand, her fingers were freezing. That usually tells me more than her face ever could. She sat down, looked at me and said, "I hired a private investigator to prove my husband was cheating." Then she gave one sharp little laugh and added, "What the investigator actually told me was worse." That was enough to get my full attention, not because cheating stories are rare, they are not, but because when a woman says the truth was worse than cheating, it usually means the marriage was rotten in a way nobody around her had noticed yet. Claire said she and Derek had been married for 7 years. No children, nice house, shared routines, shared friends. The kind of marriage outsiders describe as stable just because nothing obvious is on fire. And according to Claire, that was exactly what made the whole thing so dangerous. Because Derek wasn't sloppy. He was careful in all the worst ways. He did not come home smelling like perfume. He did not leave love notes lying around. He did not start random fights to create distance. He just changed in quiet little ways that were easy to excuse one at a time and impossible to ignore once they started piling up. Claire said, "It was like living with someone who had already left the marriage emotionally, but still remembered where he kept his shoes." That line stayed with me, because it was specific. She said the first shift was his phone. For years, Derek had left it anywhere. Kitchen counter, couch cushion, bathroom sink, car cup holder. Then suddenly it was always face down, always close, always in his pocket. If he left the room, it left with him. If it lit up, he looked at it like the screen had teeth. Claire said she asked him one night, lightly, why he suddenly guarded his phone like state secrets. Derek didn't snap. He didn't stumble. He smiled. That kind of patient smile men use when they want to make you feel silly before you've even finished your question. And he said, "Claire, not every private thing is a betrayal." She looked at me and said, "That sentence annoyed me so much because it sounded reasonable." Exactly. That is how careful liars survive. Not by saying wild things, by saying calm things that make your instincts sound dramatic. Claire said she tried to ignore it after that. Tried being the key word, because once something starts feeling wrong inside your own home, you do not really go back to peace. You just start pretending harder. Then came the little pieces. A restaurant charge for 2 on a night Derek had claimed he skipped dinner completely. A gas receipt from the opposite side of town on a Saturday he had told Claire he was helping his brother move. A florist charge that definitely wasn't for her. Derek hadn't bought her flowers in over 3 years. She knew exactly how little effort he ever put into that marriage. None of it was enough on its own. That is what made it so ugly. A big lie can blow up all at once. Small lies make you question yourself first. Claire asked Derek about the restaurant charge one night while they were cleaning up after dinner. He barely looked at the statement before saying, "Client meeting," she asked. "At 8:30? And he said, "Some people work later than you do." I looked up at that part, because there it was, the tiny cruelty, that nasty little shift liars make when facts stop protecting them, so they reach for disrespect instead. Claire said, "He always did that. He'd answer the question, but he'd make sure I felt small for asking it." That part to me is almost worse than cheating, because betrayal hurts. But humiliation is what poisons the room afterward. She said there was another moment that finally pushed her past denial. One evening she walked into the laundry room and found Derek scrubbing the inside collar of his shirt with a wet towel, not washing the whole shirt, not doing laundry, just scrubbing one spot. Claire said she asked him what he was doing. He looked at the shirt, looked at her, and said, "Spaghetti sauce." I actually paused at that. Not because it was funny, because bad lies always sound insultingly lazy once you already know they are lies. Claire said, "The worst part is, I almost pretended to believe him, that I understood too, because sometimes women do not stay quiet because they are naive. Sometimes they stay quiet because once a lie becomes obvious, the marriage changes shape, and some part of them is still hoping to delay that moment." She said she stopped confronting him after that. Not because she trusted him, because every conversation ended the same way. Derek acting tired, Derek acting disappointed, Derek acting like her questions were the actual threat to the marriage. Never loud, never messy, just calm enough to make her sound unstable by comparison. Claire said, "He didn't need to prove I was wrong. He just needed to wear me down." That was the sentence that told me Derek was not careless. He was strategic. So Claire did what smart women do when they realize honesty is no longer in the room. She started documenting, not because she wanted drama, because she wanted facts. She saved screenshots. She kept receipts. She wrote down dates. She built a timeline in her phone notes. Once she saw the pattern, she said she was terrified she'd forget a tiny detail and let him talk her out of reality again. Then one Friday night, Derek said he was meeting a client for drinks downtown. Claire wanted to see where he was really going, so she waited 10 minutes, got in her car and followed him. Not closely, not recklessly, just far enough back to see where he went. He didn't drive to an office. He didn't drive to a bar near work. He drove to a narrow street downtown and parked outside a restaurant with dim glass and expensive lighting. And Claire sat there across the street, watching her husband check his reflection in the rearview mirror before he walked in smiling at his phone. She said, "That smile made me feel sick." I looked up at Claire then and believed her. A man who is unhappy is one thing. A man who looks pleased while he is lying to your face is another. Claire never went inside. She told herself she wanted certainty, but in that moment, what she actually wanted was one more excuse not to blow up her own life. So she drove home. And that same night, she hired the investigator. Not the next week, not after another lie. That same night, she found Mr. Holloway through a lawyer her coworker had used years ago. Retired police. Quiet. Expensive. The kind of man who, according to Claire, looked like very little shocked him anymore. They met in a coffee shop 3 days later. Claire brought a folder. Inside were receipts, screenshots, dates, notes, and a typed timeline she had made herself. Mr. Holloway read through everything without interrupting. Then he asked her one question. He said, "Do you want proof that your husband is cheating?" Claire told him yes. Immediately. No hesitation. And then he asked, "Or do you want the truth?" When I heard that, I knew exactly why that question shook her all weekend. For the first time, she had to wonder if the truth might be worse than what she'd already prepared herself for. She asked him what he meant. Holloway closed the folder, slid it back toward her, and said, "Sometimes infidelity is the easiest version of a bad marriage." That would have unsettled me too. But she still hired him, because by then she had gone past wanting comfort. She wanted certainty. Mr. Holloway followed Derek for 6 days. On day 2, he called and told Claire that Derek was definitely lying about where he spent his evenings. On day 4, he called again and said Derek was not meeting a woman at a hotel. That should have relieved her. Instead, Claire told me it made her panic, because if it wasn't a mistress and it wasn't work, then what had she married exactly? On day 6, Mr. Holloway asked to meet in person. Same coffee shop, same back table, same manila envelope. Claire said she knew before she opened it that whatever was inside was going to rearrange her life. The envelope held photographs. Derek entering the same small brick building on 3 different evenings. Derek leaving hours later. Derek standing outside once with a gift bag in his hand. Derek sitting in his car before going inside, like he had to prepare himself. Claire said she tried to give it the easiest explanation first. She told herself, "Okay, fine, there's a woman in there. Painful, ugly, but ordinary, still survivable." Then Mr. Holloway looked at her and said the sentence that made her whole body go cold. Claire went quiet for a second at my table. I asked, "What did he say?" She looked down at her hand in mine and said, very softly, "He told me, 'Your husband is not having an affair, Mrs. Claire.'" Then she swallowed and added, "He said Derek had been going there to visit my father." I kept holding her hand and asked, "Your father?" Claire nodded once. Not dramatic, not shaky, just that empty, dead nod people give when their mind still refuses to accept what they're saying. She said, "At first I thought Mr. Holloway had made some kind of mistake. Reasonable, because if your husband is sneaking around and lying every week, most women do not jump straight to 'he's secretly visiting my father behind my back.' That is not where the human brain goes first." Claire said she actually laughed when she heard it. Not because it was funny, because it sounded impossible. She told Mr. Holloway, "My father lives 2 hours away," and Mr. Holloway calmly slid one more photo across the table. It was her father, standing outside that same brick building, waiting. Derek walking up a minute later. The two of them going inside together like this had been arranged, like this had been routine, like Claire was the only person in the story who did not know the story existed. She said, "That was the moment I stopped feeling jealous and started feeling sick. I believed that too, because cheating humiliates you, but discovering your husband and your father have been building a secret life of meetings behind your back? That rearranges your whole idea of safety." Claire said she kept staring at the photo of her father because in that moment, it was easier to look at him than at Derek. Easier to let her mind land on her father first than to fully face what her husband had been doing. Then Mr. Holloway said the sentence that made it all worse. He told her, "Your father's been using a mailing address in that building for about a year." Claire looked down at her hand and said, "A year, not 3 weeks. Not since things got weird. A year." That meant whatever Derek was doing with her father had started long before she found the receipts, long before the late meetings, maybe even before she could name what felt wrong inside her own house. When a woman realizes her instincts were late, not because she was foolish, but because the people around her had been lying longer than she knew. Claire asked Mr. Holloway what the building actually was. He told her it was not an apartment, not a hotel, not exactly an office either. A small business suite space, half empty, cheap rental rooms, mailboxes, back offices. The kind of place nobody notices because nobody expects anything meaningful to happen there. A perfect place for ugly, quiet things, she asked. What were they doing there? And Mr. Holloway said the most careful answer possible. He said, "I can only tell you what I documented." Good answer. Terrible for the nervous system, because documented truth is still truth, but it makes you walk the last few steps yourself. Claire said Derek and her father had been meeting there regularly, usually in the evenings, usually for 1 to 2 hours. She said there were also bank visits on 2 of those days, one to a small local branch Claire and Derek had never used together. That got my attention. Not because I suddenly knew the answer, because the story had just shifted again. This was not feeling like sex anymore. This was feeling like paperwork. Claire said Mr. Holloway then asked her a question she had not been prepared for. He asked, "Does your husband have access to any family accounts tied to your father?" Claire said no, then paused. Not directly. There's always a sentence after the correction that matters more than the first answer. She told me her father had owned a small construction company years ago. Nothing huge. It had never made them rich, but it had given him the kind of stubborn pride men build their personalities around. When Claire married Derek, her father liked him immediately. Too much in hindsight. Called him solid, practical, smart with numbers. The kind of man you could trust with business. There it was. I said, "Your father let him in." Claire nodded. Not just into the family, into the books. Apparently, over the past 2 years, Derek had been helping her father with tax paperwork, digital statements, online account access, and some old property documents her father did not like dealing with himself. Claire said it had seemed harmless at the time. Helpful, even. That is how some betrayals survive. By wearing the clothes of usefulness. She said Mr. Holloway told her that if she wanted the full picture, she needed financial records, not just surveillance. Then he said something else she has obviously replayed in her head 1,000 times since. He said, "I don't think your husband's hiding a woman. I think he's hiding a partnership." That sentence made me stop filing for a second, because that is worse in a different way. An affair can still pretend to be weakness. A secret partnership with your father? That sounds deliberate. Claire said she drove straight from the coffee shop to her father's house that same night. No warning, no call, no time to calm down and talk herself into being polite. Her father answered the door in sweatpants and house shoes, and looked genuinely confused to see her, which she said almost made it worse, because guilty people who look panicked at least make emotional sense. He looked inconvenienced. She held up the photo and asked him directly, "Why are you meeting my husband in a business suite downtown?" Her father glanced at the photo once, then looked at her face. Then he said, "You've been spying on family now?" That answer told her everything before he ever confirmed anything. Because innocent people hate accusations. Guilty people hate evidence. Claire said, "That was not my question." Her father sighed like she was the difficult one, and stepped aside so she could come in. She said he moved slowly, like he was still deciding how much of the lie to keep, and how much to trade in for something cleaner. He sat down in his recliner, and said Derek had been helping him sort out some financial complications. I looked up. That phrase is never attached to anything innocent. Claire asked, "What financial complications?" And her father said the sentence that made her blood run cold. He said, "The ones your husband's been helping clean up since your mother died." That stopped me. Because suddenly the whole story widened. This had not started with Derek. Derek had walked into an old mess and found a way to make himself useful inside it. Claire told me her mother had died 4 years earlier. After that, her father had gotten sloppier with paperwork, taxes, and debt. Not reckless in a dramatic way, just old school, proud and allergic to asking for help. He had borrowed against equipment, moved money where he should not have, delayed filings, hid notices in drawers, the kind of stupid male pride that grows mold quietly. And Derek, apparently, had seen it. Better than that. He had learned how to use it. Claire asked her father whether Derek was helping him or blackmailing him, and her father actually had the nerve to look offended. He said, "Don't use ugly words just because you don't understand business." That line would have made me furious. Claire said it made her go calm, not peaceful, cold. She asked him, "Are you and my husband hiding money?" He stood up so fast the recliner snapped back. And there it was. Not grief, not confusion, panic. He told her to leave, not deny it. Leave. Claire said that was the moment I knew the answer was yes. She drove home and waited for Derek. That to me was smart. Because if you accuse a father, he can still act old and wounded and complicated. If you accuse a husband who thinks he is smarter than you, he almost always talks too much. Derek came in just after 9:30. Claire said he took one look at her face and knew something had changed. Men always know when the woman in front of them has stopped asking questions and started carrying facts. She put the surveillance photo on the table between them. No speech, no warm-up, just the photo. And she said, "Try lying to me one more time." Derek looked at it, then at her. Then, and this detail stuck with me, he sat down. He didn't explode. He didn't deny it right away. He just sat. That is what men do when they realize the conversation has left the arena of charm and entered the arena of damage control. Claire asked, "What are you doing with my father?" Derek rubbed his jaw and said, "Helping him." Same word. That filthy little word again. Helping. Everybody is always helping, right up until the paperwork surfaces. Claire said, "Helping him do what?" And Derek answered in pieces. Bad sign. Liars love pieces. He said her father was in trouble financially. Said the company was messier than Claire realized. Said some documents were wrong. Said some old transfers had to be cleaned up. Said he had been trying to protect her from stress. Please, that line should be illegal. Claire asked him if he had been moving money. Derek said, "Not like that." Which of course means yes. Exactly like that. Just not in words that can convict him. Claire asked if her name was anywhere in it. That was the question. The real one. The air changed the second she said it. Because Derek looked away. And when a careful man looks away, it's usually because the truth has reached the part he knows he can't soften. Claire said, I asked him again, "Is my name anywhere in this?" And Derek said, "Technically." I actually stopped for a second when she said that. Because there's no good way a husband can say technically when you ask if your name is tied to secret financial deals with your father. Claire told me she stared at him and felt her whole body go hot, then cold, then empty. She asked, very slowly, "What does technically mean?" Derek said some property paperwork had been transferred temporarily to make certain obligations easier to manage. Some account access had been opened under a trust-related structure. Her father had told Derek it would all be corrected later. Nobody was trying to hurt her. Nobody is ever trying to hurt you, according to people actively hurting you. Claire said, "Did you put anything in my name?" Derek looked at the photo again instead of at her, and that was answer enough, before he opened his mouth. Then he said, "Your name made it easier." That sentence would have ended me. Not because it was loud, because it was efficient. No fake apology. No fake confusion. Just the ugliest version of the truth, standing in socks in your kitchen. Claire said she actually had to grip the edge of the table to keep her knees from giving out. She asked him how long he had been using her name, and Derek said not using like that, which is another phrase that guilty people should honestly stop trying, because it only works if the person listening is desperate to help them lie. She asked whether her father knew, and Derek said, of course he knew. That part hurt her more than the money. Not because she trusted Derek more, because daughters keep one tiny embarrassing piece of childhood hope alive way longer than they should. Even grown women do. Even angry women do. Some small part of you still wants your father to stop the worst thing before it crosses the line. Apparently hers had not. Claire asked, "What exactly did you and my father do?" Derek said it involved a line of credit, temporary entity filings, and one property-related instrument that needed a cleaner name attached to it while her father sorted out the old mess. Cleaner name. A daughter's name is apparently very useful to men who need innocence on paper. Claire told me she asked him one final question before she threw him out. She said, "Were you ever cheating?" And Derek actually had the nerve to laugh. Not happily, not kindly, just once, like the question itself was beneath the scale of what she should be upset about now. Then he said, "Claire, if I were only cheating, you'd be lucky." I looked up so fast my chair creaked, because that, right there, is the kind of sentence that changes the whole temperature of a story. Claire said that for a second, she honestly could not tell which part of that sentence disgusted her more. The arrogance, the calm, or the fact that Derek seemed to think what he had just admitted was somehow more sophisticated than ordinary betrayal. As if using her name in secret financial dealings with her father was so much darker, so much more adult, that cheating had become the lesser crime.
That kind of man always thinks complexity makes him impressive. It does not. It just makes him filthy in more than one category. Claire said she threw him out that same night, not with a dramatic screaming fit, not with a plate flying at his head. Cold. She told him to get out. For once Derek looked like he didn't have a script ready. He kept trying to slow the moment down, kept saying things like, "You're emotional, and this is more complicated than you understand, and if you do this wrong your father could lose everything." There it was. Not guilt. Leverage. That is always how men like that sound at the end. They do not say sorry. They say consequence. They try to make the truth feel more dangerous than the lie. Claire said, "The second he brought my father into it again, I knew my husband still thought I was the weakest person in the room. I looked at her and asked, 'What did you do?' She said, 'I stopped being his wife.' That's a hard sentence, but it was the right one. Because after that, Claire didn't spend the night crying on the kitchen floor, calling friends for advice, or writing some long hurt text about trust. She said she locked the door after Derek left, opened her laptop, and started pulling every record she could find. Bank statements, property documents, old emails, tax notices, anything with her father's company name, anything with Derek's login history, anything with her own name attached to a number she did not recognize. That was the part that scared Claire most. Not nauseous, not insulted, scared, because cheating can break your heart. This kind of betrayal can follow you into your credit, your future, your legal record, your next apartment, your next job, your next marriage, if you are unlucky enough to trust again. She said it was almost funny how fast things started to show themselves once she stopped hoping for innocence. There was one account she barely remembered signing years earlier, supposedly for a temporary business convenience during tax season. There was one digital access form her father had once asked her to initial, because according to him, your husband understands this stuff better than I do. There was one property-related filing she had ignored because both men had acted like it was boring and procedural, and men love making women feel silly for not being interested in paperwork they are actively weaponizing. Claire found her name everywhere, not loudly, not in giant flashing fraud letters, just enough. Enough to make her useful, enough to make her clean on paper, enough to make her dangerous to herself. She said, "That was when I realized Derek didn't just marry me and betray me. He studied me." That line made me pause, because yes, that is exactly what some men do. They learn your habits, your blind spots, your family fractures, and then they build themselves a little empire inside all the places where you were still trusting. Claire said she called a lawyer the next morning. Not the one who referred her to Mr. Holloway. A different one. Someone meaner. Someone who dealt with financial mess, liability exposure, and fraud risk. She told me the lawyer listened for less than 10 minutes before interrupting her and asking one question. "Is your name on anything you did not fully understand?" Claire said yes. The lawyer asked, "Do you have copies?" Claire said, "By then I had started making copies of everything." Good, because women survive men like Derek by eventually becoming excellent archivists. The lawyer told her not to contact her father again without documentation, not to speak to Derek without saving every message, not to sign anything, not to delete anything, and most importantly, not to assume the truth had fully surfaced just because she had finally seen the edge of it. That is what scared Claire most, the edge. Because once a husband and a father are already lying together, there is no reason to believe they only lied once. She spent the next 2 days pulling records and meeting with the lawyer. Meanwhile, Derek apparently decided that since honesty failed, charm deserved one more try. He sent her flowers. Please, white ones, elegant ones, the kind men send when they still think aesthetics can soften corruption. The card said, "We can fix this if you stop panicking." That would have made me set something on fire. But Claire said it did not make her cry. It made her laugh. Because nothing says repairing a marriage like telling the woman you secretly used on paper to calm down before she reads the documents too carefully. She saved the card. Of course she did. Then her father started calling. Not once. 7 times in one afternoon. He left 2 voicemails. In the first one he sounded offended. In the second one he sounded old. That switch is always interesting to me. Men can move from authority to fragility very quickly when consequences start looking official. The second voicemail said, "Claire, sweetheart, don't let outsiders poison your mind against family." Outsiders, meaning the investigator, meaning the lawyer, meaning facts. That word alone told her everything. Because when guilty people start calling evidence outsiders, what they really mean is, please go back to the version of reality where only we get to explain what happened. Claire told me she did not answer. Not her father. Not Derek. She let them both keep talking into silence while she and the lawyer kept working. And then came the number that changed the whole thing from ugly to catastrophic. The lawyer called her on the 3rd day and said, "I need you to sit down before I explain this." Never a good sign. Apparently one account connected to the property setup Derek described had risk tied to Claire's name, way bigger than she thought. Not life-ruining millions. Worse, in a way, an amount big enough to be serious. Small enough that men like Derek and her father probably believed they could slide it around quietly, clean it up later, and never get caught unless Claire looked too closely. That is the thing about secret financial abuse. It often lives in the range of manageable, right up until the victim is the one left managing it, Claire said. That was the first moment I actually got scared. Not nauseous, not insulted, scared, because cheating can break your heart. This kind of betrayal can follow you into your credit, your future, your legal record, your next apartment, your next job, your next marriage if you are unlucky enough to trust again. I said, "Did you confront them again?" She nodded, but this time she did it properly. Not in a kitchen, not in her father's living room, in the lawyer's office. She said Derek arrived first, dressed like he had come to a board meeting instead of a reckoning. Her father came 10 minutes later, and had the nerve to look wounded, like everybody had dragged him there against his will when he was the one who had helped build the whole mess. Claire said, "Seeing them together in daylight, with a legal pad between us, was the first time I understood how long they'd been treating me like an instrument, not a daughter, not a wife, an instrument." Her lawyer laid out copies of the filings, account links, signatures, and timestamps. Nothing dramatic, just paper, which is always the most humiliating form of truth. There is something so satisfying about watching manipulative people realize their performance skills mean very little once the documents have arrived. Her father tried first. He said he had been under pressure after Claire's mother died. Said he made mistakes. Said Derek had only been trying to help keep everything afloat. Said nobody intended to involve Claire in anything harmful. The lawyer asked, "Then why was her name used without clear informed consent?" Silence. Derek tried next. He said the structures were temporary, technical, misunderstood. He said the actual exposure was being exaggerated. He said Claire was reacting emotionally to something that could have been resolved privately. That word, privately. Men commit sins in private and then resent women for refusing to bury them there. Claire said she looked directly at Derek and asked one final question. Very simply, "Did you ever love me more than you loved Access?" That one stayed with me, because it cut deeper than the fraud. Derek stared at her for a second too long and said, "That's not fair." And there it was. Not yes, not no. The guilty middle. The one cowards hide in when the truth would make them sound as disgusting as they are. Claire said that answer broke something in her more cleanly than the paperwork had. Because at least fraud is practical evil. That answer meant the marriage itself had probably been contaminated long before it ended. Her lawyer moved quickly after that. Formal notices, liability separation steps, documentation freezes, instructions that all further contact go through counsel. The property-related mess did not magically disappear, but Claire's name stopped being something Derek and her father could casually use while calling it temporary. And once the legal pressure started, both men got meaner. That did not surprise me. Men who lose access often become cruel before they become quiet. Derek started texting her things like, "You're blowing this up just because your feelings got hurt, and your father is old and sick with stress because of you, and the one that stuck with me most, you are going to regret involving strangers in family business." Family business. That phrase should honestly come with a warning label, because it has covered more theft, abuse, lies, and coercion than almost any other phrase in the English language. Claire saved every message. Good girl. Her father, meanwhile, went in a different direction. Claire said her father still sends occasional messages on holidays. Small ones. Careful ones. The kind cowards send when they want reconciliation without ever admitting guilt. "Thinking of you. Miss you. Family is family." No, family is not family once family starts using your name as a shield. Her father sent her an email titled, "Please remember who has loved you your whole life." That title alone would have made me delete the internet. The email was full of guilt, soft blame, grief language, and zero actual denial. He never once said he had not done it. He just kept saying he had been desperate. Derek had made things sound manageable, and he never meant for Claire to feel used. Feel used. I hate that wording. It is so careful, as if the real problem is not the use itself, but the daughter noticing how it felt. Claire said, "That was when I finally understood my father was not confused. He was ashamed. That matters. Confusion can be taught. Shame usually means they knew." I asked her, "So what happened to Derek?" She let out one long breath and looked lighter than she had at the start, which is always the strangest part of these stories. Sometimes women sound calm, not because the story got easier, but because finally telling it means they no longer have to carry every piece alone. She said Derek moved out within the week. Not gracefully, not nobly. He still tried one last manipulation on his way out. He stood in the doorway holding a duffel bag and said, "One day you're going to realize none of this was personal." Hearing that, I actually made a face. Claire said, "I know. That's what made it evil." Exactly. Because if a man can destroy your peace, your trust, your legal safety, and your marriage, without even seeing you as a person in the crime, that means he never saw you as a person at all. He saw a function, a cleaner name, a safer signature, a wife-shaped access point.
And that, honestly, is colder than cheating. I finished the last part of her nails and told her, for what it's worth, I think what they did was worse. She nodded, slowly. Then she said, that's the first time anyone said it that plainly, and I meant it. Because if your husband cheats, he betrays the marriage. If your husband teams up with your father, uses your name, hides legal exposure from you, and then tells you that if he were only cheating you would be lucky, he hollowed it out and turned it into a tool. A few minutes later, Claire picked up her phone, slid it back into her purse and stood up to leave. She looked calmer than when she came in, not healed, not happy, but clearer, like she had finally stopped trying to force that story into the smaller, simpler shape of an affair, and started calling it what it really was, a conspiracy of convenience, built on her back. And before she left, she looked at me and said, I used to think the worst thing a husband could do was sleep with someone else. Then she gave a tired little smile and added, I was aiming way too low. After she walked out, I sat there for a second looking at my table. Because stories like that leave a strange taste in the room. What got me was not just Derek. Men like Derek exist everywhere, useful in public, filthy in private. What got me was the father. The father who let his daughter's husband into the family, into the paperwork, into the trust, and then stood there acting inconvenienced when she finally saw what they had done. That kind of betrayal has a different smell to it. Older, colder, less impulsive. So let me ask you, if you found out your husband was secretly meeting your father behind your back, using your name to clean up financial messes, and then told you you'd be lucky if he'd only been cheating, what would destroy you more, the husband or the father? Because I'm telling you right now, sometimes an affair is the kinder version of the truth.